So I've been a professional gardener for a little over 20 years as of this recording, and I have seen some things that work and some things that don't work. And I've seen a lot of things that were done by professional landscapers that just didn't work. And it made me realize something. Landscapers never come back a few years later, even just 1 or 2 years later, let alone 5 to 10 years after they've installed something. So they never see what happens, and they don't actually learn from their work of what works and what doesn't. Whereas I, as a maintenance gardener, see it every day. And so I've seen some things to complain about. And so I've put together this video of me ranting about all the things, not all, but some of the most common things that I've seen landscapers do on a regular basis that just doesn't work. Remember to like this video if you're learning something new. Leave a comment if you have any questions. Also, let me know, did I miss something in this list of things that landscapers do that doesn't work? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you want more gardening content in your video feed every week, make sure to subscribe. One last little side note caveat here that I want to put in. I posted on, I think it was Facebook, something about this years and years ago about a specific thing that landscapers do that absolutely drives me nuts because it almost always results in the death of a plant. And it wasn't clear in that I was focusing on landscapers. And I want to be clear here. This video is meant to educate both landscapers and customers, clients, homeowners. For the clients, the shame in this is not directed at you. The shade that I'm about to throw is towards professionals who say they know what they're doing and they charge for their work and then they do it wrong. So I want to be clear on that if this sounds shameful in any way, that is directed towards professionals, not homeowners. For the homeowners, I am intending this as a list of things to make sure that your landscapers don't do when you hire them. Now, without further ado, 12 things that landscapers do all the time that tend to not work. Number 1, no care whatsoever given to the roots of trees and woody shrubs. Landscapers bid by the job, not by the hour, so they tend to do things as quick as possible. They just crank it out as fast as possible because the faster they get it done, the less they have to pay in labor and the more profit they end up making in the end. So they tend to take shortcuts on things like planting. They'll dig a hole, they'll take a plant straight out of its pot and throw it in the hole. Now with annuals, that can work. Herbaceous perennials, okay, sort of. Still not great, but they don't usually die as long as they're not too pot bound. However, with trees and woody shrubs, this absolutely doesn't work. You have to take it out of the pot, wash away all the potting medium, and check the roots to make sure they're not spiraling or pot bound or girdling already in the pot. Because if you just take a woody plant out of a pot and throw it in a hole, likely something like this is going to happen. I have been saving these for years for this video. These are examples of things that I have dug up after they died from a client to see why did they die, and I found, lo and behold, they were still in the shape of a pot. This was probably the first one I dug up. This was a rhododendron. It was planted in the shade. It was watered regularly and deeply, but it died. Why did it die? Well, because it's still in a pot shape. The roots were never able to escape. So this poor thing was doomed to fail literally the minute it was put in the ground. This one, I literally was able to pull it out of the ground and put it in one of the pots of the things that I was planting. This, I think, used to be a bird's nest spruce, but the roots never escaped at all. This one I know was part of a professional planting job because of what was around it. It was in a brand new housing development on a slope. That client had never planted anything up there. That's what she hired me for, was to add some color because it was all just boring shrubs and it needed a little bit more color. And yeah, this was dead, popped right out of the ground. Just like that. I don't know how long that one was in the ground for. This one here cracks me up just because of how it's spiraling. It literally looks like a pinwheel, and it came out of the ground this way because it was put in the ground this way. Now, this lifting root, I think, happened after I took it out of the ground. It must have been sitting funny for a while. This actually tells me that there was a little bit of care given to the roots because they are going out, but they're not going straight out. They're going spiraling. So it's like they spread the roots out and twisted it in the hole. I have no idea how this happened, but this is another one. Client said it was professionally planted. It was in the ground for about 10 years, I think, and it just never thrived. I actually did a full video on this one, so check that out. I'll link it up here and in the description down below about this tree not thriving. Let's dig it up to find out why. Oh, this is why. This one, same thing. Client said it was dead. Why is it dead? Let's dig it up. Sure enough, the roots are all in the shape of a spiral. They're all packed together, still in the shape of their pot, and they never were able to escape. And this one behind me, this beautiful Atlas cedar that probably costs at least $150, $200, maybe $300 at the nursery, was popped out of its pot and put in the ground. Exactly like this. It died 2 years after being planted by a professional landscaper. This one, I was actually surprised at how many roots were able to escape. There were at least 4 that had gone over the pot and gotten out. And so it took me a minute to dig this out, but it was already completely dead. And I did a short on this as well. And then this one, this was a volunteer maple tree, and I brought it along to show you what roots are supposed to look like, because this planted itself and then it grew properly. It was never in a pot. You see how the roots are going out? I had to cut these off so that I could keep it. There's a taproot growing straight down, and there's anchor roots growing straight out. They're not spiraling. They didn't hit the side of a pot and turn. This thing was a beast to get out of the ground because it was so well anchored. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how long it was in the ground. This was a new client when we pulled it up, but it was very happy when we dug it up because it was planted correctly. If you see roots creeping along the surface of the ground, in my experience, that is a hint that what's under the ground is actually pot bound because, for instance, I think it was this one. When we dug it out, there were several roots that had managed to creep up out of the pot shape in order to get out. I used to think that meant, oh, the tree's fine because it's got roots spreading out. No, that means that the roots can't get out sideways, so they had to go up in order to get out. So if you have shrubs or trees that are doing that, if it's possible, I would recommend digging them up to check. If they're too big for that, just cross your fingers and hope for the best. But your best bet at that point is to top dress with some really rich compost and stuff and just spread that around, mix it into the soil so that that soil will hold water as best as possible so that the tree or shrub doesn't just desiccate and die on a hot summer day because it can't get water. Number 2, planting trees too close to the house. I see this so often, I can't even begin to count. It is infuriating. This happens a lot with new construction especially, but new landscapes in, existing houses, it happens the same way too. Landscapers will buy a cute little tree. Maybe it's only 2 or 3 or 4 feet tall, and then they'll plant it 3 feet from the house as if it's always going to stay that size. Newsflash, trees grow. You can't take a 2 to 3 foot tall spruce tree and plant it 3 feet from the foundation. It won't work. So 2 or 5 or 10 years later, doesn't matter how long, it's going to outgrow that spot and it's going to make a problem for the client. Now, I actually asked the landscaper about this one time. I was like, hey, why do you do that? Why do you plant things so close to the house? Don't you know that's going to cause problems later? This was a landscaper that did new construction. And he said, oh, the new homeowners are going to take it out anyway. They're going to change whatever we do. No, they're not. Not until it causes a problem. The homeowners buy that house because they like the way it looks. They like that cute little tree right there. They like the way that looks. And it doesn't occur to the homeowner, who is not a landscaper, that that little tree is going to outgrow that spot and it's going to destroy the siding or the paint. It's going to destroy the eaves, and it's going to damage the roof. Please don't plant things that close to the house. Number 3, planting trees too deeply. You'll notice a theme with these first 5. They're all about trees because trees get messed up so often. I'm going to use my volunteer maple here as an example because this is perfect. The anatomy of a tree is you have the trunk and the upper growth, the branches and other lateral growth up here, and then you have the roots. Well, the point where the trunk meets the roots is called the root flare. And the root flare should be at or above the soil level. And it is far better to have the root flare be above the soil, like exposed above the soil, than it is to have it buried. because roots are designed to push soil out of the way so that they can expand. Trunks are not. Trunks cannot move soil out of the way in order to expand. So trunks will girdle and stay tiny below the soil if they are buried too deep, but they'll continue to expand above the soil. And so you'll get this nice wide caliper tree up here on this pencil-thin base, and then it'll fall over eventually because there's just not enough support. That's another problem that happened with this Atlas cedar. You can see, here's the trunk, it's nice and wide, and then here where it gets dark is the line where it was planted. It was buried this deep, and you can see that the trunk underneath the soil where it was buried too deep is narrower. It's constricted. And then way down here, at least 4 or 5 inches down, is where the root flare is. So this tree actually had 2 problems. It was taken out of the plot and put in the ground without having the roots broken up, and it was planted too deep. This was doomed to fail the day it was planted. Here's the solution for this. If you find a tree that's planted too deep, even if it's already constricting, you can pull the soil away and give that trunk some space. You can literally excavate the root flare, pull the soil back, and let this trunk have air and breathe above the soil line. As soon as the soil is off the trunk and it's able to move its fluids and juices and whatnot correctly, it will actually begin to expand and it will begin to strengthen. I actually found a tree last year that was planted at least 6 inches too deep and was so constricted I thought for sure that tree was doomed. And it was just planted that spring. I found it in the summer. It was so constricted, it was amazing, it was still standing up. I pulled the soil back and excavated that root flare. I took some pictures, I told the client, and I told her to demand the landscaper take this out and put in a new one, because it was so bad that it should never have been planted like that in the first place. This was a brand new tree. Now, the landscaper refused. They said the tree was fine. I thought it was going to die in a couple of years, but because I had pulled back that soil, it actually did begin to recover. And I went back this spring and got some new pictures, and I even had my arborist buddy, Alan, with me at the time, and I showed him, and he pointed out that this tree is already recovering from all of that trauma and all of that damage. So that tree, amazingly, is now going to be fine. But had I not pulled that back, it would have fallen, likely within the next couple of years. Number 4, leaving trees tied and staked for over a year. This is another one where landscapers never follow up. I think they expect the homeowners or the clients to do it, but clients don't know to do this unless you tell them, and even if you do tell them, they're likely going to forget. So it's the landscaper's job to come back within a year and take away your stakes. So trees are staked for multiple reasons when they're planted, especially if they're on a slope or in a windy spot. They need the extra support while they get their roots established. But landscapers overdo the staking, like a lot. Half the time, you don't even really need a stake. It doesn't hurt to have 1 or 2, and in some situations, it's necessary to have 3 stakes around a tree. But the stakes should be tied loosely, and they should be removed within a year. There's so many things that can happen when a tree is left staked. For one thing, again, on this poor Atlas cedar, you can see girdling in the trunk here, 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 and here. Because in the nursery, they had the stake coming up, and this is what they used to train this tree into this shape, which is why these trees are so expensive. It takes a lot of labor and time and maintenance to grow them this way. But when I pulled this out of the ground, it was still tied to that stake, and the ties had girdled all of the branches. The stake could have been removed, but it wasn't. I've taken stakes off of random trees in parking lots so many times just because I can see that it's trying to kill the tree. If it's of a business that, I know the owner or whatever, I'll go and tell them, but half the time I just take the stakes. I don't know who to tell, but it needs to be done. And I know the landscapers are never going to be back to do it, because half the time those trees have already been in the ground for 5 years. Obviously, they're not coming back. Some of the things that can happen when a tree is left staked too long, the first one is girdling. That tie will quite literally strangle the tree over time. It can't move its vascular juices through that area of the stem, so it will, or trunk, or whatever it's tied to. So that branch or trunk or whatever will eventually get girdled and it will die, or it'll be really restricted. Another thing that can happen, and again, I've seen this as well, is where there's a tree and it's staked. Below that stake is completely immobile. It never moves. But above the stake, it blows in the wind. This creates a weak point. A strong gust of wind, and it'll snap right over. Another thing that'll happen is if the stake ever is taken off, the roots didn't learn to hold the tree up in the wind. So the whole thing will fall over because those anchor roots never established properly. This is why staking should be done loosely so that the tree can move a little bit and the tree learns how to stand up straight. So as a homeowner, if you have a tree that was planted by whoever, it doesn't matter, and it still has stakes on it a year later, go ahead and remove your stakes. If it still needs staking after a year, move the stakes, move the ties to a different spot on the tree so that one place doesn't get completely girdled, and make sure that it is tied loose enough that the juices can move throughout the tree. Number 5 is having sod that goes right up to the trunk with no tree ring, nothing around it to stop the string trimmers from girdling it and killing it. This is another one I see a lot with new landscapes, especially in new construction. They'll plant a tree, it'll often be too deep, and they'll put the sod right up to the trunk. I saw this just recently at a housing development over here. They weren't clients of mine or I would have fixed it, but the sod was right up to the trunks. What's going to happen when the lawnmowers come and they use their string trimmers around that tree? It's going to girdle the tree and it's going to kill it. The protection for that is those little sleeve things. There's these plastic sleeves that you can put around the base of a tree to stop the string trimmers from hitting the trunk. Okay, I guess. That tends to hold moisture on the trunk, which can cause rot. Doesn't always, but it can. But more often than not, what happens is the grass just starts growing up behind that. Wouldn't it be easier to just cut the sod out for a few inches around that trunk so you don't have that as a problem? I don't understand this one, but to each their own. So the fix for this is either to get one of those plastic sleeves or it's to cut a tree ring. I like nice big tree rings myself. Personally, I like to have at least 2 feet, if not 3 or 4, out from a tree, because then you have room to plant things at the base of the tree. You can put in some really nice annuals each year if you want, or you can plant some perennials in that spot. Those aren't going to get girdled by the string trimmer. They'll just get cut down, but at least that way your tree is protected, and hopefully your lawnmowers don't mow them over with the string trimmer. All right, we're done with the trees. Here's a few other things that landscapers and other professionals tend to do that just doesn't make sense to me or just doesn't work. Number 6, spraying with an herbicide when pulling would have been faster and more efficient. I want to be really clear on my stance on herbicides and pesticides. I am an organic gardener whenever it is appropriate to be, okay? So I do my absolute best to do things organically. I pull weeds by hand whenever it is feasible to do so, and in almost every circumstance. If it's not feasible, I have other organic kitchen chemicals, basically, that are much safer, in my opinion. A lot of scientists disagree with this, and a lot of other professionals disagree with this, and that's fine. But I have other things that are safe enough for us to eat that I use in the garden to control weeds, such as vinegar and salt. Real salt, not Epsom salt. That one doesn't make any sense. Anyway, but I don't use those anywhere near plants. So like in a driveway where it's gravel and you've got weeds coming up everywhere, and it would just absolutely be a tedious nightmare to try to pull all of those, I use vinegar. I do. It's what I use. But I'm also a realist. There are some plants that absolutely have to have a chemical control, such as Japanese knotweed. I've dug it out before, but it is not something that I recommend. It is not for the faint of heart, and if you have a big patch, it's not feasible. You're not going to get it all, and it's going to come back, and you're actually going to spread it by breaking up those roots. You're more likely to spread it horizontally and make the problem bigger. So I don't recommend digging Japanese knotweed. That one has to be sprayed, and it has to be sprayed at the right time. You need to know what you're doing in order to do that. Another one where I often recommend chemical control is field bindweed. Just because that's another one with roots that go forever and you're never going to get them all. So you need to use a systemic herbicide in order to control that one. There are a few other examples of where I recommend herbicides. Steep slopes where digging would cause erosion. you should absolutely use a chemical in that situation. So there are situations where chemicals are appropriate and even necessary. So I don't want you guys to think absolutely everything has to be organic. Absolutely not, because there are situations where organic means do not work. However, when you have annual weeds that you could shuffle hoe and be gone, or you have an easy taproot weed that you could stick a shovel in the ground and pop out of the ground and be done, why spray it? This makes no sense to me. It would take less time to just pop that weed out of the ground than it would be to go to the store, buy the chemical, mix the chemical, and spray it. And then you have the dead thing still there that you have to pull out anyway. So why not just pull it out to begin with? So that one bugs me a bit. Not just because it's an inefficient use of time, but also because it's an unnecessary use of chemicals loose in our environment that are causing a lot of other problems. Number 7, planting things too densely. There are methods where this works. I'm not talking about those. What I'm talking about is where a landscaper buys 100 bird's nest spruces or whatever, and they plant them a foot away from each other. Plants need proper spacing, and to put them too close together will cause them to die. I think the thinking behind this is that, well, a lot of them are going to die anyway, so this way the ones that survive will fill in. Okay, but if you planted it right to begin with, if you didn't just pop it out of the pot and throw it in the ground, and then you didn't plant them too close together where they choke each other out, you'd have a much lower mortality rate. So plant them correctly and at the right spacing, and you wouldn't have that problem. If you already have this going on in your yard, just take the initiative to take out either the middle ones in between where the spacing should be, or take out the weakest or the sickest. That's the best way to prevent this from causing bigger problems in the future. Number 8, lasagna fabric. I already have a whole video on mulches and what works and what doesn't, and I've already done plenty of ranting in that video about how much I hate fabric. However, I know that this is the standard practice of landscapers, and, sometimes it does work, I guess. But there is one practice that I have seen many times that I just do not get. I do not understand why this is done at all, and it's done fairly often. So maybe I'm missing something with this one. It just seems ridiculous to me. What they're doing is, maybe they weed, probably not, but they take a layer of fabric and they put it over the ground. And then they take soil, fresh garden soil, and they put it on top of the fabric. And then they take another layer of fabric and put it on that, and then they put the mulch on. And when they plant, they'll cut through the fabric to plant something, which then sits on top of that lower layer, because, again, they're taking it out of the pot and putting it in the ground. They're not cutting through the lower layer of fabric. So the plant is sticking up out of the ground, just asking to be cooked and killed. And then they leave it like that, with the plant sitting on top of the lower layer of fabric and then sticking up out of the upper layer of fabric with mulch on top. Maybe I'm missing something here, but that is wrong on so many levels. Okay, I don't know why you would ever do this lasagna method with fabric, okay? You're burying plastic under the ground. The weeds are still going to come through it eventually, and then you're going to have an even bigger mess to clean up, because in order to get that fabric out so that your soil can do all the things that soil needs to do, like, have water go through it and air and gases move through the soil the way they're supposed to, you're going to have to take up the soil with 6 inches of dirt on top. This is a nightmare. This is a labor-intensive nightmare, and it's so expensive to have somebody do this. How do I know this? You can guess. I've done it a few times. Okay. It is terrible. So I don't know why that's done, and I don't even know a solution if you have that done already. Really, the best solution is to take it out, but that is a labor-intensive nightmare, so I'm going to wish you the best on that one. Call a professional with an excavator, I suppose. That would be the easiest. Number 9, and I guess this one's about trees as well. Bad pruning and topping. There is a reason that arborists go through years and years of training and classes and then recertification trainings and all of this stuff. There is a reason that there are certifications for arborists. There's a reason that there is a master arborist certification. These are not just words. These are things that people earn. And so when you go hire any old Joe landscaper or lawnmower to prune your tree, if they haven't been trained in arboriculture, unfortunately, they're probably not going to do it right. And that's just the sad truth of the matter. There are so many wrong ways to prune. And so here's a short list of them so that you can check and see if any of these problems exist in your trees. And if they are, make sure to call a certified arborist to come and look at it. Leaving stubs. A tree, again, tree anatomy. You have the main trunk, you have the lateral branch. There is a connection somewhere where there's a bulge. That is called the branch bark collar. The cut should be exactly on that collar, but not into it and not extending from it. So if you extend from it, that's called a stub. And if you cut into it, you are removing the cellular layer that's responsible for creating callus that's going to seal that wound. Trees do not heal, they seal. Okay, they cover it up like a scab. They can never heal that wound. And in order for your tree to heal the fastest, you have to make that cut at exactly the right spot. There's also topping, where instead of cutting at a joint, at a node, they just cut somewhere on the branch. They cut the canopy off of the tree and leave a bunch of big branches with random seeming cuts, or perfectly symmetrical cuts, I suppose. That's called topping. That is terrible for the tree. What's going to happen after that is the tree is going to have a stress response from this trauma that it's just experienced, and it's going to start sending out water sprouts everywhere, which then makes your tree bigger. Because I think topping is usually a person's means of reducing the size of the canopy, but you're going to make your problem so much worse by doing it that way. Again, a certified arborist will be able to reduce the size of the canopy without making these terrible cuts. Lion's tailing is another one. This is where you cut all the branches off until the end of the tree. It's just a really dumb solution. Just don't do that. It makes your tree look stupid. There are certain problems on trees that need to be looked out for that, again, an arborist wouldn't think twice. They would know that they need to be on the lookout for these issues. Things like included bark. That's where you actually have a branch that instead of growing together and knitting together with its trunk and having a tight connection, it actually grows with the bark in between the branch and the trunk. And eventually they're going to actually push each other apart and split, and then you're going to have a catastrophic failure of a branch falling. An arborist would know to look for that. Joe Schmo landscaper probably doesn't. So the solution to any of these and any number of other potential problems with pruning your trees is to hire a professional, certified arborist for tree work. Number 10, plants in the wrong place. There's an old adage, and it's still very relevant today. The right plant in the right place. What that means is you take a plant and you find the right place for that plant. And it's also the right plant that you want to put in that place. So a full sun plant needs to go in full sun. It needs to have the right kind of water. It needs to have the right kind of soil. These are all things that you need to think about when you're planting plants. And then you think about the design of, like, what are the other plants around it? Does it look good in this spot? But first, you need to pick the right plant for that exact spot in your yard. If you take the wrong plant, it doesn't matter if it's in the right place. And what I mean by that is things that are not supposed to be growing in your area, like weeds, for instance, because I've seen it. Nurseries sell them because they're not on the noxious weed list, so landscapers plant them, and they're just not the right plant for that area. The other thing is you could have the right plant, you could put it in the wrong place. So you take a shade plant and you put it in blaring hot sun, or you take a sun plant and you put it in deep shade, or you take a plant that needs a whole lot of water and you put it in a xeriscape, or vice versa. There's a lot of ways that you can plant the wrong plant in the wrong place. So the solution to this one, if you've already got plants that are in the wrong place, is you need to move them. So if you can wait until fall, that's the best time to move plants. But if they're not going to survive until then, do it right now. Just use a lot of water when you dig something up to transplant it and you move it to the right place. The best solution to any of these problems, though, is prevention. And in order to make sure that your landscaper is going to put the right plant in the right place, make sure you vet them and you know that they actually know what they're doing, they know what they're talking about, and they're going to do the right thing for you. Number 11, mulching without weeding and mulching on top of desirable plants. I just saw this one last week. My husband and I were taking a walk through this lovely, native little tiny botanical garden at a place that we were staying. And it was full of native plants, and it had a bunch of grass in the beds. Fine, whatever. It was a native garden. Native grasses are fine. They're supposed to be there. But while we were staying there, a landscaper came by and just started throwing bark on top of the grass. I'm not sure what that's supposed to do, but it's not going to kill the grass. You're just going to have grass coming through your bark. And on top of that, he was throwing the wood chips, not wood chips, they weren't wood chips or I'd be complaining less. He was throwing the bark on top of a bunch of the desirable plants. Because here's the thing, weeds are weeds for a reason. They're tenacious. They keep coming back. And whatever you do to try to stop them is likely not going to work unless you manually remove them and keep removing them forever. Throwing bark on top, they just laugh at that. They're like, thanks for the blanket. That's cool. Meanwhile, your desirable plants tend to be a lot more tender and they can't really hold up to that kind of stress. And so by throwing mulch on top of your desirable plants, you're going to kill them, but it's not going to stop the weeds. This happened too when I did the redesign of the traffic triangles down on Northwest Boulevard in Monroe. This was almost 10 years ago now. I did a project for my neighborhood where we planted a bunch of really cool plants in these triangles that were just an eyesore. And then I agreed to maintain it. And I did for several years until I moved out of that neighborhood. After we planted, another landscape company came in and put bark down. Well, they buried all the plants that we had put in. And by spring, most of those plants had been killed already because they got buried with this bark mulch. Meanwhile, the weeds were coming up through it just fine. It's just another example of a lack of foresight and not taking the precautions that you need to take in order to protect your plants when you're doing something like mulching. The way to solve this, what I do is I take a bunch of empty flower pots and I cover those small plants with the upside down flower pot so that I can mulch around it. And then I pick up the pot and the plant is not covered. That's how I prevent myself from absolutely burying a desirable plant. And I also weed before I mulch because you're not going to keep the weeds gone if you just throw the mulch on top. Number 12, charging for professional work when you don't know what you're doing. When a professional presents themselves as a professional, you have the reasonable assumption that they know what they're doing and that they are charging for their knowledge because that's actually what they're charging you for. Yes, it's the labor, but it's also the knowledge. You're paying somebody who's supposed to know what they're doing. And when a landscaper doesn't know what they're doing, but then they charge you landscaper prices for doing it, you're going to have so many problems in the next 1 to 2 to 5 years down the line because this person didn't know what they were doing. Now, in all fairness, we've all taken on jobs that we shouldn't have. I've done this too. I've taken on jobs where I shouldn't have done it because I didn't fully understand what I was supposed to be doing. The one case where this really comes to mind, I didn't fully understand what the client wanted when I took the job on. And it turns out that they wanted a bunch of stuff that I've never done before and we don't do. And there's a reason we don't do it. And so, yeah, I messed up that job. We've all done it. But the thing is, can you make it right? Can you catch your mistakes in time and make it right for the client? All of these examples in this video are things that I have seen professional landscapers do on a regular basis. They charge for their work and then they piece the frick out and you never see them again. And so they never come back and see that the work they did failed. They never come back and see the dead plants that they left in their wake. They never come back and see the weeds growing through that landscape fabric. They never come back and see the tree destroying the house because it's now 6 to 10 feet high and it's all over the eaves and messing up the roof. So that's why this is the 12th on the list to wrap it all up, is to say that, look, make sure your landscapers know what they're doing. Make sure that they understand what you're asking for and that they have knowledge and experience in that exact thing that you're asking for so that you will be happy with the result and you'll get your money's worth out of it and you won't have a big mess to clean up in a year or two. That felt really good to get all that out of my system. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any additions to this list, make sure to leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What have you seen? What have you paid for that then didn't work later? Have you seen anything on these lists? And what was your experience with it? And if you'd like more content like this, let me know, because I'm sure I could rant about something else. So give me a topic idea if you'd like me to complain about something. If you like this video, make sure to tell me by hitting the like button. If you have any questions, you can also leave those in the comments below. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do that so you get more gardening content in your video feed every week. Thanks again for watching, everybody. I will see you in the garden.